MSW Media.
Spy Talk, a podcast at the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, national security, and military operations.
Hi there, I'm Jeff Stein. This is Spy Talk. On the eve of this week's election, Charles Bethea, a staff writer for The New Yorker, wrote a startling piece called Americans Prepping for a Second Civil War. Many now believe, it said, that the U.S. could descend into political violence. Some are joining survivalist communities, canning food, and buying guns. To a certain degree, that looming threat was based on the baseless idea projected by Donald Trump that the Democrats were going to steal the election and his defenders had to arm up and come to his rescue. Well, he won, of course, so it looks like the threat of such violence has evaporated, for the moment anyway, despite calls by extremists such as the Proud Boys to carry out attacks on anti-Trump people. But even if such rhetoric by extremist militias is no more than smoke, political strife with the potential for violence may be around the corner, Bethea tells me on this week's podcast. Should Trump launch his plans for mass deportations and or arrests of his political enemies, including top Democrats, journalists, and prosecutors who have pursued him in court on a myriad of charges? It's not hard to imagine Democratic officials in, say, California or New York moving to block such schemes. In any event, Charles Bethea is with me today to talk about what's been going on in the world of Civil War preppers. Charles Bethea, welcome to Spy Talk. You wrote an astonishing, mind-boggling to me piece for The New Yorker last week called Americans Prepping for a Second Civil War. Well, obviously they were prepping in case the Democrats won and they were going to do whatever they were going to do. Trump won resoundingly, so for the moment, it seems like the Second Civil War has been put off. But you also wrote that according to FEMA, some 20 million Americans are actively preparing for a catastrophe, roughly twice as many in 2017, and so on and so forth. So these preppers aren't going to go away. So let's start with, who are these preppers? Give us a feeling of what they are.
Well, historically speaking, I think we all have, mostly from television shows and such, we have an idea of what they look like. They're these kind of tinfoil hatted, bunker dwelling, paranoia, obsessed folks. Maybe they have a military background. Maybe they're on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. That's the stereotype, mostly white males too, probably.
Not true.
Not true now. Increasingly, these are pretty average, folks, middle-class folks who, and certainly there are the Zuckerbergs of the world too, who are doing what they can to prepare with the millions at their disposal. But there are a lot of just average people who are anxious about a myriad of possible catastrophes and collapse scenarios, as they're often referred to, among which are political violence and civil war. And these people are trying to do what they can increasingly to be ready for that unknown breakdown.
Right. And they aren't preparing just for, Democrats, let's say, taking control, liberals taking control, or trying to steal the election, as they put it. They're preparing for climate change and other catastrophes as well, right?
Yeah, there's really I didn't come across in my reporting anyone who was preparing for just a single kind of breakdown. That would be kind of silly. Everyone's concerned about lots of things. And so there's this term that's increasingly being used called the poly crisis. The poly crisis is kind of the umbrella phrase for all of these things. The increasing gaps in wealth between citizens, economic inequality, climate change disasters, pandemics, and then the increasing possibility of civil unrest and even something like a civil war. And when I use the word civil war, I kind of put quotes around it because I think it's important for people not to immediately think that we're talking about trenches and muskets and gray coats and blue coats. We're not that far, but we are 8 generations past early 1860s, and a lot of things have have changed since then. So war is inevitably going to look different. A civil war now, there are lots of ways that we can imagine what it would look like, but certainly it's going to be different. And even if it's not a quote unquote full scale civil war, there's going to be lots of chaotic violence that people are increasingly worried about in the wake of elections that go the wrong way for one side or the other. So again, when I say civil war, I'm kind of putting it in quotes, but certainly the fact that lots of people are using that phrase now and preparing for what it means to them is concerning.
Now, indeed it is. Now, I grew up during duck and cover drills. That's how old I am.
Yeah.
And I remember, there was a kind of a period where lots of people were building fallout shelters because they feared nuclear war. This is an entirely different magnitude. Take us inside one of the places you visited, the Fortitude Ranch, for example. Give us a brief postcard tour of that.
Sure. Yeah. When I'll take you back to, it was mid-July, July 13th, actually, which we would later understand was a date that would go down in history. I had scheduled a trip to Colorado to meet up with a guy named Drew Miller, former Air Force colonel, an entrepreneur in retirement. He's now in his mid to late 60s, who back in around 2015 started this series of retreats, if you will, or compounds around the country. One of which is in Colorado. The idea was to cater to people like him, who he felt wanted a place to go when things broke down, that in times of peace they could just use as sort of like a ranch to go enjoy the wilderness and the outdoors and one another's company. So these are they're rustic but comfortable.
But then
when a collapse happens and you get the notification on your phone, assuming phones work in the collapse, from this app that comes with your membership to Fortitude Ranch, you rush to the location, you're let in, assuming you're fully paid up, and then you just hunker down with 100 new neighbors, basically, who are also members of this community, and you're extremely well armed. You've got enough food for each person to last at least a year. You have fish ponds, you have farm animals, you have, if it comes to it, lots of bugs to eat. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But they've got the thing set up so that you can really outlast most breakdowns. And to become a member, the entry fee is between like $5,000 and $40,000, depending on the size of your group, the size of the room that you get in the shelter, things like that. Whether you have a toilet in your room, that's considered a luxury item. So it's, I would say, it's sort of like joining a country club, maybe a lower end country club in terms of the amount of money you would be paying. But the idea is this is your exit strategy.
Instead of golf clubs, you have AR-15s. So people arming themselves to the teeth. And not just Republicans, by the way. You cite a study put out by UC Davis concluding that 1 in 3 adults in the U.S., including up to half of Republicans, feel that violence is, quote, usually always justified to advance certain political objectives. That's a seismic change, isn't it?
That's a big change. I would say, though, that we should add to that not that many are probably willing to engage in that violence that they think is justified. So there's a little bit of a jump from saying something's justified to I'm going to do it. But there is also a pretty large chunk of people. I would say a large chunk, even if it's only like 2 or 3% of the U.S. population, like 8 million people who are very much willing to engage in violence with a political aim. So that's a smaller subset of that larger number of people, but still, like as you're suggesting, a large and worrying number of people.
Yeah, you visited maybe a dozen of these redoubts, and you found hundreds, if not thousands, of people preparing for doom and so on. Where do they go now that Trump has won?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, most of the academic experts who I spoke to did point to Trump losing or claiming that he'd lost as the beginning of a bad scenario that could lead to political violence, chaos, and even some kind of quote unquote civil war. But there's certainly a number of other ways that things can develop during a Trump presidency that could cause people on the left or even in the middle or even on the right to be increasingly troubled and increasingly willing to take up arms. He's willing, as we saw in his first term.
We think of these mass deportations that he's proclaimed. Of course, it's hard to know what to take seriously. Trump says a lot of things, threatens a lot of things, promises a lot of things. He doesn't carry through. Mass deportations is problematic, to say the least. States, governments and metropolitan governments will have a lot to say about that. But if he goes on, carries out this threat to arrest prosecutors and Democratic officials that he doesn't like, that's another huge issue, which could spark some violence. But I don't know. I don't see that. I had to ask you, I began to wonder if some of these people were, to use a cliche, pulling your leg. Flashing their guns and their rifle ranges and all their weapons and so on, because they say, "Oh, here's this liberal reporter who wants to show that we're all these dangerous people. Let's give him a show." Did you think that?
I don't think so. I mean, I went to a survival school, for example, and the people who I met there didn't know that I was going to be showing up. So there was no time to prepare, no plan to prepare. And in any case, I talked to the owners of these schools, who are very reputable folks, who described and put me in touch with past pupils at these schools who spoke to me very movingly and emotionally about what they see as going wrong in this country. One woman told me America's dying. She said so with words and with an emotion that was really palpable and sincere. So no, I don't really buy that suggestion.
Yeah, and we've seen that, in interviews of people waiting to go into the Madison Square Garden rally and other Trump rallies for years now. People truly believing. I mean, I saw, I'm sure you did too, interviews with people who claim that the Democrats engineered the hurricane in North Carolina, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of true believers. Is this sort of a mass psychosis, or
I think I don't know. I don't think I was inclined to sort of roll my eyes at most of the kinds of people and preparing that I was expecting to see. But as I spoke to people like John Ramey, I talked to in the story, he's a guy who used to work in the Obama administration, was frustrated by the sort of slow pace at which government and bureaucracy moves to address needs, and he went out on his own and started this website called The Prepared, where average people can go to learn about things like how to build fires and how to store water. And they're all very reasonable skill sets that apply to, as I said, any number of breakdowns. But they're things that a few generations ago people might have known how to do, but increasingly now we just hit a button, get the food on the doorstep, or we hit a button and the fire ignites in our fireplace. We don't know how to do basic things anymore.
People don't know how to start a real fire.
Well, people don't know how to do basic math. They just use their calculators, right? We're so attached to technology and so reliant upon it now that we've lost a lot of basic skills that put Civil War aside for a second. There's just basic things that can go wrong. In Atlanta, where I live, we lost our clean water for a week or so. Our pipes broke throughout a lot of the city, and so you had dirty water coming out, and very few people, I should say, had any backup water plan or any water filtration system of their own. I mean, these are really basic things that average people in a society should just have or know how to get. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's a spectrum here. I don't think everyone needs to run out and get AR-15s, and certainly my article shouldn't be taken as a directive to anyone to do anything. I'm merely observing what I saw and found. Mm-hmm. But I did leave those experiences thinking, you know what? I'm gonna just tighten the screws in the door. I'm gonna pack a bag, put a few things in it in case I need to get out or in case I need to get back home. I'm gonna learn how to do a few things that I didn't learn how to do at getting my Ivy League English degree. Like basic useful stuff that.
What will Gen Z do without Starbucks?
Right, or you're not gonna be able to pull up TikTok in a disaster and find the video you need to explain the thing that you don't know how to do. So yeah, I think that there's some levels of this, some levels of preparation that are maybe a bit extreme, but the real takeaway for me, separate from a specific collapse situation involving a civil war, more broadly speaking, is what are ways that we can just be more ready for very, mundane disasters, very normal, predictable storms, power goes out, snowmageddon, whatever it may be.
Drought.
Yeah. I mean, these things are coming. However it comes, it's coming.
Well, on that note, let's take a short break. Okay, we're back. One of the quotes that stuck out for me was you interviewed Shane Hobel. I think you visited his survival school, which is outside New York, maybe Westchester County. And he said, it used to be mostly soldier of fortune and doomsday prepper guys who took the courses. Now it's women, even Democrats, people who used to make fun of my school. I guess that makes your point, that people are getting attuned to a doomsday.
Yeah, and I don't love the word doomsday, because again, that makes us think that the only thing to prepare for is some sort of, rift in the earth opening up and everybody getting sucked in or something. Like that's unlikely to happen. But yeah, I think there was a woman who brought her 6-year-old daughter to that school, and that girl was learning how to make camouflage using natural things found in nature. She's learning how to make fire. She's teaching adults how to do that. It's in a way, it's similar to Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. It's the stuff which I didn't grow up doing that I think a lot of people are now realizing, hey, this is both useful and it's kind of fun to learn how to do. But for a lot of them, it does connect to this anxiety that's coming in part from where the hell are our politicians taking us? Are these systems sustainable? And if and when they break down, where does that leave me?
I'm probably not the only one who, in reading your piece, thought of Sterling Hayden and Dr. Strangelove lecturing Peter Sellers on the dangers of fluoride.
Yes,
because we have RFK Jr., railing against fluoride and saying they're going to take it out of the water. I mean, there's a certain kind of
bodily fluids, our precious bodily fluids.
Exactly. So, and of course, when you talk about this guy Ramey and other senior military people, weighing in on the need to get prepared for whatever, civil war, natural disasters, and so on, it really makes you think that you were on to something when you undertook this piece and started to investigate this underbelly.
Yeah, I mean, I should back up and say it all started rather innocently. I was for my own interest, not so much as a journalist. I was looking into taking a survival course because I thought civil war was on the horizon. This was 7 or 8 months ago, before the assassination attempts, but because I just wanted to learn things like how to use a compass, which I didn't learn growing up from my parents or at camp or anything. And I was just like, there's some things I want to know how to do as a 43-year-old that I don't know how to do. And as I made those phone calls to figure out what schools to go to, I was asking some questions about people who were taking the courses. And that's where I started hearing these stories about, oh yeah, a lot of people are showing up now talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and talking about Trump, or talking about how the Democrats are going to come for their guns. And I was like, holy shit, what else are people doing now to prepare other than the schools? And so that's when I started talking to the Fortitude Ranch folks. I started calling up places like the Armor Max, where this guy, Mark Burton, told me his company is now making like 8 times as many armored cars for Americans as they did 4 years ago. And that he has a section on it. He's got a section on his blog that's specifically about what to do in civil war. So, I'm finding these things. Back to your question earlier about pulling my leg, that was on the blog before I called the guy, like the Civil War thing. So Certainly you could ask, a skeptic could ask, well, are they playing these things up to fear monger or to stoke fear and to sell products? And that's a fair question to ask. But when you talk to academics who study Civil War and you hear, oh no, actually those people who don't stand to make money off of the topic are also worried, and here's the reasons why, and here are the scenarios that could lead down that path, you begin to connect the two and see that there is a real need that comes from a real circumstance that we're in right now historically.
Yeah, I did think in reading about some of the ranches you visited that there was a monetary incentive here
Sure.
to keep these ranches going. But
Sure.
there's no putting aside the fact that millions of Americans are in a frame of mind to think about preparing for some sort of emergency they expect to come. And that
Yeah, well,
itself,
you can't blame them after seeing January 6th or seeing any of these political protests that have seen instances of violence or multiple breakouts of violence. You can't blame people for starting to wonder, like, where is this all headed? And you can look back to, and you can point to make the counter argument. You can point to, as an academic did with me, to concerns about like a cyber 9/11 or a cyber Pearl Harbor, and how that's been this concern for 50 plus years, and it's never actually come to pass. There's never been a technological paralysis that has really shut down the country in the ways that experts have been concerned that it might. And so, maybe the Civil War talk is also all going to come to naught, which would be a great outcome. But the good thing that academics said to me is that by talking about this stuff and by getting concerned about it, you allow people to make preparations and even to push off the possibility of this thing coming to pass. People in the political space can deal with things that they talk about. It's a lot harder to deal with things that you don't talk about. So I think in that way, there's some optimism to be had.
yeah, but just to circle back to one point you were making in terms of cyber, it's clear that our adversaries have wormed their way into a lot of our infrastructure, not just stealing our emails and the files, personnel files of federal officials, but getting into our power grids and so on. And they're preparing themselves to be put in a position that if the conflict broke out with the United States, that they could shut us down cyber-wise. I'd like to think that all our young Americans who grew up on games, that we can outbest any adversary in that realm, but they could do a lot of damage, and so I'm sure that's in the mind of some of these preppers too. They're not right-wing nuts or left-wing nuts for that matter,
or nuts at all. They're just people who
just plain nuts.
Yeah, exactly, just unsalted plain nuts. People buy insurance. This is something I like to mention when people push back on this kind of prepping. It's like, well, you buy insurance for outcomes that are very low probability, whether it's a car wreck, maybe that's a moderate probability, but a car wreck or a fire in your home. Like, you do things to hedge against those outcomes, right? So why not hedge in an economical way against a more macro event? And I think there's
in a nutshell, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Exactly. Yeah. And the fact that you have a lot of former government people, that I met a lot of former government people who were doing this kind of prepping, that to me should sort of like raise a flag or raise your, get your antenna up, right? If people who work inside government are coming out from that experience and starting to prep, it's like, whoa,
Right.
Okay, things maybe aren't looking so good in there.
It put the hair on my neck up, the back of my neck. I mean, it was mind-boggling, and certainly we're all happy that no violence has occurred, and so on, and the chance of it occurring is small. I say that with my fingers crossed. But it's there, and that's my takeaway. When I first approached you about being on the podcast, you said, "Well, Trump won, and so and I don't see any. I haven't done any reporting. I don't see any signs that violence is afoot." And my thought was, well, the stats that you reported in your fabulous piece, that 20 million Americans are actively preparing.
That's true. That's true. I didn't make totally clear to you. It's not that I don't think that people are going to keep repairing. I think they will. It's just that the imminence of a violent uprising seems a little less likely. However, I do think that in a Trump administration where you have people on the right emboldened, you will see, and this isn't just my hypothesis. I did discuss this with Drew Miller from Fortitude Ranch this morning. You will see red counties in blue states potentially start to pull away, ignore, defy state regulations, state laws, state directives, because they want to live more in tune with the conservative federal government at that point. And so, I think you're going to see some conflict and some tension and some potentially some concerns there. But I do think that like a big secession, like a Texas leaving the Union, that was only going to ever potentially happen if Trump had lost.
No, but you can, to follow your point, you can see, say, California refusing to carry out a mandate for mass deportations, which would probably require the participation of local and state police. And I can't see California going along with that. And that invites a conflict to one degree or another. So So how those play out probably won't be smooth, probably won't be easy, probably won't be without massive protests and some instances of violence. A lot of that will probably be contained, one hopes. But in the meantime, maybe best to prepare. On that happy note, Charles, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. You've been a busy guy this week, and we really appreciate your valuable time. Hey, I enjoyed it. Thanks for doing this. And that's it for this week's Spy Talk. Thanks for listening. Do check out Charles Bethea's piece on the New Yorker magazine site if you haven't already, as well as other examples of his stellar reporting. Meanwhile, you can find lots more interesting conversations like this one in our archives available at our home, at MSW Network, or on Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, mosey on over to our Spy Talk newsletter on Substack, where my colleagues and I offer fresh reporting and analyses from the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, and military operations. Just Google Spy Talk and you'll find your way there. This week's Spy Talk podcast was smoothly produced, as always, by Kanai and expertly edited by Molly Hawkey for MSW Media. Oh, by the way, that music you've been hearing, that's from the soundtrack of Civil War, the 2024 Doomsday movie. That's it. I'm Jeff Stein. See you around.
For more original reporting and insights like this, subscribe to spytalk.co on Substack and follow us on Twitter at @talk_spy. If you enjoyed our podcast, subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
MSW Media.